In order to appreciate the context of Ein feste Burg, it's essential we develop a good knowledge and understanding of the religious landscape in Europe before and at the start of the 16th century, as well as understanding music's place in religion in the period immediately prior to the Reformation. So what was the place of music in religion? Well, in the centuries before the Reformation, that's the Protestant Reformation, music held a key place in worship. In the Middle Ages, plain chant, as sung by priests, became a vehicle for bringing the text of the Latin liturgy to life. And over the course of time, harmony was added to this plain chant, and by the Renaissance period, the emergence of complex polyphonic textures had become evident in church music, and such was its complexity that trained choirs were required to sing this music. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, then really you should be dipping into the Notre Dame school of Léonin and Perrotin before also looking at the music of Lassus later in the 16th century and other composers from the Franco-Flemish polyphonic style. At the beginning of this video, I showed a portrait of a picture of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the castle church at Wittenberg in 1517. And that's an important date to remember. It could be seen as the starting gun for the Protestant Reformation, and that irreversibly transforms the religious landscape of Europe, particularly in Germany. And as a priest and professor of theology, Luther came to reject many of the teachings and principles of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly its view on indulgences, the topic of his 95 Theses. And when Luther refused to denounce his own writings in 1521 at the Diet of Worms, an assembly of the Holy Roman Empire, he was excommunicated by the Pope and outlawed by Emperor Charles V. And Luther had to be hidden, and he was hidden by the Elector Frederick III, the Wise of Saxony, and was installed in a secret location near Eisenach. It was during this time that Luther translated the New Testament into German, making it more accessible to congregations, which had also a lasting impact on the church and German society. It had a lasting impact on Bach himself, who not only composing in German the words for his music, but expects the congregation to be part of the act of worship. Bach himself is a pietist, which is very much a product of the Protestant Reformation. Now, Martin Luther had a high respect for music and for church music, and in fact he even said, as a quote which is worth memorising, "Next to the word of God, music deserves the highest praise." Luther really did appreciate the power of music and saw it as a tool for breaking down barriers between clergy and ordinary people. He wanted the congregation doing things in the church. He pioneered a new musical form, the chorale. Chorales were hymn tunes in the vernacular, that is, in German language, not in Latin, and were verse compositions set to simple tunes that resembled popular secular songs and were designed to be sung by a congregation during services. Luther's hymn writing was prolific. He wrote, we know at least 4,000 Lutheran hymns were published by the end of 16th century. It was through his chorale melodies and texts that Luther affirmed his Protestant ideas. In fact, Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott went on to be a Protestant favourite for centuries to come. The subsequent reaction to Luther's movement was varied, both in terms of Protestant reformers, and you should know the name Erasmus, Calvin, Zwingli, and composers. Each had their own view about Protestantism. There was lots of different flavours, and the kind of church music they preferred. Over the course of the next 200 years, Lutheran music took new and adventurous paths. The addition of solo and instrumental passages contributed to the development of the oratorio. Heinrich Schütz and Dietrich Buxtehude experimented with large-scale choral settings of scriptural texts. The connection between Luther's initial chorales and the works of J.S. Bach is an obvious one that we really should try to understand. Okay, so now we're on to the big man himself, Johann Sebastian Bach, who spent much of his life writing music primarily to fulfill the needs of his employers, be they sacred or secular. In 1723, Bach was appointed as cantor at St. Thomas's in Leipzig, which is pretty amazing. Leipzig had a choir, a boys' choir, from at least the year 1212. Anyway, as well as providing music for St. Thomas's Church, he was also responsible for making sure that there was music for 3 other churches in the city. That's St. Nicholas's, the New Church, and St. Peter's. Although the last 2 I've mentioned was to a much lesser extent. Bach's Leipzig was a flourishing commercial city with about 30,000 people. It boasted one of Europe's oldest universities and was also noted as a centre for printing and publishing. Bach's responsibilities included preparing music for daily church services at St. Thomas's and St. Nicholas's, as well as extensive Sunday programmes involving a main service that started at 7 a.m. and finished at noon, as well as 3 additional short services. At the main service, the choir would sing a motet, a Lutheran Mass, Kyrie and Gloria, and hymns and a cantata on alternate Sundays. As cantor, Bach would direct the first choir at the church whose turn it was to hear the cantata, while a deputy conductor would take the second choir in a simpler musical setting at the other church. The third and fourth choirs were made up of the poorer singers and sang simpler services at the other 2 churches. The orchestra at Bach's disposal, which incidentally accompanied the first choir, was recruited from the school in town and also from the Collegium Musicum of the university, an extracurricular society that performed contemporary music, and Bach became its director in 1729. Interestingly, Telemann had founded that society in 1704, and the orchestra comprised between 18 and 24 players. We know that Bach would rely on having 2 flutes, 2 or 3 oboes, 1 or 2 bassoons, 3 trumpets, timpani, and strings, and the accompanying orchestra. So it was, not a bad size for his cantatas, and that's what I'd like to talk about next, the cantata itself. So the sacred cantata, and there are secular ones, but the sacred cantata is what we've got in our anthology, held a prominent place in the Lutheran liturgy of Leipzig, and the subject matter would often be linked to the content of the gospel, and that gospel reading came immediately before the cantata in the service. Very much like its predecessor, Schutz's sacred concerto, a cantata would include choruses, solo arias and chorales. The churches in Leipzig required 58 cantatas each year, as well as music for other significant church feasts like Good Friday, festivals, weddings, funerals, and an annual cantata for the installation of the city council. Between 1723 and 1729, Bach composed 4 complete annual cycles of cantatas, each with about 60. Over 200 of Bach's cantatas have been preserved, and some of which were new compositions for Leipzig, and others of which reused material from his earlier works. It's impossible to generalise about their character, but it can be said that in the early cantatas, Bach responded to the changing affections and images of the text with some true expression and intensity in his music. In contrast, his Leipzig cantatas seem less subjective in feeling and more regular in structure. Though mainly sacred, Bach also composed a number of secular cantatas throughout his life. Some were for royalty or for the public or private occasions, while others had a plot line and were written in opera buffa style. For example, if you want to check one of those out, Bach's Coffee Cantata, which is BWV 211, if you're interested. Ein feste Burg is one of 52 chorale cantatas that Bach composed. He wrote approximately 40 of these in his role as St. Thomas's cantor in Leipzig, which formed the backbone of his chorale cantata cycle. A chorale cantata is a church cantata based on a Lutheran hymn, both in terms of text and melody. It is not certain when this version of the cantata was composed, but it is in the format of Bach's second cantata cycle, in which all the cantatas are based on a Lutheran hymn tune. Right, so we don't know the exact year in which Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott was written, but we do know the date on which it was performed. It was performed on the 31st of October because it was it's Reformation Day. And what Reformation? We know now. It's Luther's Reformation. Ein feste Burg is a reworking of one of Bach's earlier cantatas, Alles was von Gott geboren, which was composed in Weimar in 1715 or 1716 for the third Sunday in Lent. Now I'm putting up Martin Luther's 1529 hymn and the tune, not in neumes, and this hymn tune would have been very familiar to Bach's congregations, and they would still have been able to recognise it even after Bach has decorated it in the first movement. So what to do from now? Well, you should certainly, although we only have to study 1, 2 and 8, you should certainly know the parts that make up the cantata. I'll put those up onto the screen now so you can see those. And of course, I will be making more videos on Ein feste Burg so that we can analyse it according to the Edexcel syllabus. And that goes up onto the screen as well now. But for what you can do for yourselves is you could actually expand on the things, the subjects I've talked about in this video. And it would be a very good idea for you to familiarise yourself with the hymn tune by singing it. Okay, if that means taking it to choir and asking Miss Shepherd to do it with you, all the better. And you might want to consider some basic cadence exercises with this, or maybe even harmonise the entire chorale before studying it. So that would be a pretty awesome thing to do too. Whatever you do, don't do nothing. Cheerio.